He's a complete waste of time. His little software venture will never succeed. My name is Jack Morrison. I am 29 years old and I operate a cybersecurity consulting firm called Guardian Shield Technologies from a small office space in Denver, Colorado. What frustrates me is not the doubt itself, but the absolute conviction behind it. People who have never debugged a system, never built anything from the ground up, somehow know precisely why my efforts will collapse. Robert Calloway had been predicting my inevitable failure to anyone who would listen for 2 years running. Tonight at Christmas dinner with both our families gathered around his oak dining table, he was at it again. I had stepped into the kitchen to refill the water pitcher when his voice drifted through the doorway. Sarah deserves better than this. 2 years of watching him tinker with computers in their spare bedroom. I stood there gripping the pitcher, listening to my father-in-law lecture the room about my shortcomings. The kitchen was steamy from the dishwasher, and I could hear my mother-in-law murmuring agreement in gentle, understanding tones. My own parents were likely sitting there saying nothing, which felt somehow worse than defending me. Robert continued his evaluation. The man has no grasp of financial responsibility, no reliable income, no healthcare coverage, no vision for tomorrow. Just this pipe dream about earning money from computer security. I walked back into the dining room, filled glasses for everyone who needed it, and grinned at Robert like I had overheard nothing whatsoever. But something had crystallized in my mind, something cold and calculated. The reality was, I had signed partnership agreements with TechShield Corporation 5 days earlier, $8.5 million for Guardian Shield Technologies, plus a senior position with their enterprise security division. The announcement would be released on Wednesday, 4 days from now. But sitting at Robert's table, watching him detail why I was bound for failure, I decided that some people deserve to discover success the hard way. Sarah caught my gaze across the table. She sensed something was different, but she couldn't identify what. I had not told her about the partnership yet. I wanted everything completed before I shared the development. Wanted to be absolutely sure before I raised her expectations. Now, I had a different motive for staying silent. I wanted Robert to have a few more days of confidence about my inadequacy. I wanted him to fall asleep tonight, certain that he knew exactly what kind of man his daughter had chosen. The remainder of dinner proceeded normally. Robert discussed his construction investments and his strategies for expanding his contracting business. My brother asked about my computer work and I provided vague responses about client projects and business development. Nothing specific enough to sound like boasting. Nothing detailed enough to be remarkable. When we departed that night, Robert shook my hand and wished me success with my little venture. His tone was condescending, but not malicious. He probably believed he was being encouraging. I met Sarah 5 years ago at a bookstore near the University of Colorado campus. She was completing her master's degree in psychology, and I was working as a freelance security consultant while planning my departure from a corporate IT job that was gradually destroying my passion. We discussed literature and innovation and what it meant to create something significant with your existence. Sarah believed in pursuing risks for the correct reasons. Her family believed in stability above all else. Robert had built his fortune through prudent construction investments and traditional business practices. He owned contracting companies across Denver and took pride in never making a decision that couldn't be easily justified to a loan officer. When Sarah and I got married 18 months ago, Robert had cornered me at the reception to discuss my long-term approach. I explained that I wanted to establish a company that could help small businesses protect their digital assets, develop security solutions that were robust but user-friendly. He nodded politely and recommended I consider pursuing management roles at established technology firms. Guardian Shield Technologies launched in our home office 4 months after the wedding. The concept was simple. Most small businesses faced constant cyber threats but had no way to defend themselves effectively. Enterprise solutions were too costly and complex. Basic tools were too inadequate. We could create something intermediate, something that gave small companies the protection they needed without requiring a dedicated security team. The first year showed promise. I secured 4 clients through networking and professional referrals. Sarah worked at a counseling center while I worked evenings and weekends developing the platform. Robert would inquire about my progress at family dinners, but his questions always centered on when I planned to start seeking a real job. The second year proved challenging. One client terminated their contract due to budget constraints. Another decided to manage their security internally. I spent months presenting to prospects who appreciated the demonstration but couldn't justify the monthly costs. Robert began mentioning job opportunities at companies where he had contacts, casual suggestions that felt more like interventions. This year had been transformative. 8 months ago, a medium-sized consulting firm began using our platform for their client security. They were impressed with the results and recommended us to other companies in their network. By October, we had 15 active clients and a growing demand. The revenue was finally stable enough to pay Sarah and me legitimate salaries. That was when TechShield Corporation contacted us. They had been monitoring the small business security market and were impressed with our client satisfaction rates and product effectiveness. They wanted to acquire Guardian Shield Technologies and incorporate our technology into their enterprise offerings. The initial discussions were preliminary, but by November, we were negotiating specific agreements. Last Friday, I signed the final documentation. $8.5 million for the company, plus a 3-year consulting agreement and ownership in their expanded security division. Everything I had strived for, everything Robert claimed would never materialize. But he didn't know that yet. The phone call from TechShield Corporation came on Wednesday morning while I was updating our client security protocols. Sarah had left for work 2 hours earlier, and the office felt unusually still. I had been anticipating this call for 10 days, but I still felt unprepared when Michael Torres from their acquisitions department confirmed that everything was finalized. "The press release will be distributed at 10 a.m. Pacific," Michael said. "We're thrilled to announce the acquisition of Guardian Shield Technologies and welcome you to the TechShield Corporation family." After I disconnected, I sat in my home office for 30 minutes without moving. 2 years of effort, 2 years of Robert's polite skepticism, 2 years of questioning if I was being unrealistic about what I could achieve. The validation felt immense, but also strangely detached, like I was observing someone else's success story develop. I called Sarah at work and asked if she could meet me for lunch. She said she had a break at 1 o'clock and could drive over to meet me at the cafe near our house. I didn't tell her what the call concerned, just that I had developments to share. An hour later, we were sitting at a table by the window and I was describing how our lives had just transformed completely. Sarah cried, which surprised me because she rarely cried about anything. But I realized that she had been bearing more anxiety about our financial situation than she had revealed. "I always had faith in what you were creating," she said. "But I worried sometimes about the stress you placed on yourself." "I worried about it too," I admitted, "especially after family dinners with your dad." Sarah's expression shifted. "He has been tough on you. I recognize that. But he cares, even when he doesn't communicate it well. He called me a complete waste of time, Sarah. 4 days ago at Christmas, I heard him telling everyone that my software venture would never succeed and that you deserve better." She stared at me. "He said that? I went to get the water pitcher from the kitchen and he was explaining to your mother and your brother why I wasn't suitable for you. He wasn't attempting to be discreet about it." Sarah looked wounded, not just for me but for herself. "I had no idea he was saying things like that." "It doesn't matter now," I said, though we both knew it did matter. "But I want you to understand why I might not be enthusiastic about calling him with the good news." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we let him discover it when everyone else discovers it. When the press release appears in the business news and people start calling to congratulate us. I don't need to prove anything to your father, but I also don't need to make his reaction easier for him." Sarah considered this carefully. "I understand. How long do you want to wait?" "Until he calls us," I said. "Let him process it." The press release went live at 10 a.m. Pacific on Wednesday morning. By 11 a.m., my phone was buzzing with notifications from LinkedIn, Twitter, and local business publications. The headline was direct. Denver-based Guardian Shield Technologies acquired by TechShield Corporation for $8.5 million. I watched the story spread across social media throughout the morning. Former colleagues shared the article with congratulatory messages. University friends sent texts asking if the Jack Morrison in the headline was the same person they remembered from computer science courses. Local tech communities posted about Denver's expanding startup ecosystem and how our acquisition demonstrated the city's potential for innovation. Sarah texted me from work. My supervisor just showed me the article online. She wants to know if she can feature you in the office newsletter. By noon, I had received 38 phone calls, 52 text messages, and more LinkedIn connection requests than I could process. Everyone wanted to congratulate me, arrange coffee meetings, or discuss potential collaboration opportunities. The attention was overwhelming, but also satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. What was absent was any communication from Robert Calloway. I knew he had seen the news. Sarah's brother, Mark, had called Sarah during her lunch break to ask if the acquisition story was accurate. Sarah's mother had left a voicemail expressing how proud she was and how excited the whole family felt about our success, but Robert remained notably silent. Wednesday came and went without a word from my father-in-law. Thursday afternoon, Sarah mentioned that her mother had asked why Robert hadn't called to congratulate us yet. Sarah didn't have a good answer because we both knew exactly why he was struggling to find the right words. Friday evening, Robert finally called. I was working late in my home office responding to emails from potential clients who had learned about Guardian Shield Technologies through the acquisition coverage. When his name appeared on my phone screen, I let it go to voicemail. He called again 2 hours later, then again before I went to bed. Each time I watched his name appear and disappear without answering. Saturday morning he tried texting. Jack, I have been trying to reach you. Could we talk when you have a moment? I showed the message to Sarah over breakfast. She looked conflicted, like she understood my position but felt torn between her husband and her father. He's probably embarrassed, she said, about what he said at Christmas. Good, I replied. He should be embarrassed. He's still my father, Jack. At some point, you'll need to have a conversation with him. At some point, yes, but not right now. Not while he's scrambling to figure out how to reframe the last 2 years of dismissing everything I worked for. Sarah nodded, but I could see that my unwillingness to take Robert's calls was creating tension for her. She was caught between supporting her husband and maintaining peace with her family. It was an unfair position, and I realized I would need to resolve this situation soon. But first, I wanted Robert to understand what it felt like to be ignored by someone whose opinion mattered to him. For 2 years, he had treated my work like a pastime and my ambitions like fantasies. He had never asked serious questions about my business model or my client base. He had simply assumed that anything I built would fail because I wasn't the type of person who built successful companies. Now he knew he had been wrong, and he was desperate to repair his relationship with me before the wrongness became permanent. But rushing to absolve his guilt felt like letting him off too easily. Some mistakes deserved to be uncomfortable for a while. Sunday afternoon, Robert showed up at our house unannounced. The knock came at 3 p.m. while Sarah and I were planning our week. She answered the door, and I heard Robert's voice asking if he could come in to talk with both of us. Sarah looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. Avoiding him indefinitely wasn't sustainable, and having this conversation at our place felt better than meeting on his territory. Robert looked older than I remembered, more uncertain. He sat on our couch and stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. I owe you both an apology, he began. Jack, I have been trying to reach you since Wednesday, and I understand why you haven't returned my calls. I said things about you and your work that were not only wrong but hurtful. It was a decent opening, more direct than I had expected. But I waited to see where he would take it. When I saw the news about the acquisition, my first feeling wasn't pride or excitement. It was shame. Shame that I had been so wrong about what you were building. And shame that I'd been so dismissive of your efforts. Robert looked at Sarah, then back at me. Your mother told me that you heard what I said at Christmas about being a waste of time, About Sarah deserving better. Those words were inexcusable, and I have been thinking about them all week. They were inexcusable, I agreed. But they were also honest. That's really what you thought about me. Robert flinched. Yes, that's what I thought. I was wrong, obviously, but I was also wrong in a deeper way. I let my own anxiety about financial security make me cruel to someone my daughter loves. Your anxiety? I asked. I'd built my wealth through careful, conservative investments, construction, municipal contracts, businesses with predictable cash flows. I understand that world and I know how to evaluate risk in that context. But I don't understand technology and I don't understand startups. So I assumed they were inherently more dangerous than they actually are. It was an interesting explanation, but it felt incomplete. You weren't just skeptical about my business model, I said. You were dismissive of me as a person. You talked about Sarah deserving better, not Sarah deserving a more stable financial situation. Robert nodded slowly. You're right. I confused my anxiety about your career with my assessment of your character. I decided that someone who made risky professional choices must be irresponsible in other ways, too. That was unfair and foolish. Sarah had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. Dad, I appreciate that you're trying to make amends, but Jack has every right to be angry about this. You spent 2 years treating him like he wasn't good enough for me. I know, Robert said. And I know that apologizing now after he's proven me wrong so dramatically probably seems convenient, like I'm only changing my opinion because of the money. That's exactly what it seems like, I said. Robert was quiet for a minute. Then he said, What would you need from me to believe that my apology is genuine? It was a fair question and I thought about it seriously. The truth was I didn't need Robert's approval, or even his respect. His opinion of me had been wrong for 2 years and it would probably be wrong in different ways going forward. But I needed him to understand that his dismissal had been personal, not just professional. I would need you to understand that you weren't just wrong about Guardian Shield Technologies, I said. You were wrong about who I am and what I'm capable of. And I would need you to treat Sarah's judgment with more respect going forward. Robert thought about what I had said for a long time. Finally, he said, You're absolutely right. I disrespected both of you and I did it consistently for 2 years. I don't have a good excuse for that. The conversation continued for another hour. Robert asked genuine questions about how I had built Guardian Shield Technologies, about the technology behind our platform, and about my plans for working with TechShield Corporation. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed actually curious about my work rather than just politely tolerant of it. I realize now that I never really tried to understand what you were building, he said. I made assumptions based on my own limitations, not based on what you were actually accomplishing. It was true, and it was probably the closest thing to a real apology I was going to get. Robert wasn't a man who admitted mistakes easily, and this conversation had clearly been difficult for him. When he left that afternoon, Sarah and I talked about what came next. The immediate crisis had passed, but our relationship with her family would need time to normalize. Robert had spent 2 years positioning himself as the practical voice of reason in contrast to my unrealistic ambitions. Now, that dynamic was reversed and everyone would need to adjust. I think he learned something important today, Sarah said. Not just about being wrong, but about making assumptions based on limited information. Maybe, I said, but I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine now just because he apologized. Trust takes time to rebuild. Sarah nodded. I don't expect you to pretend anything. I just hope you can both move forward from this. Over the next few weeks, Robert called regularly, but not excessively. He left voicemails about family gatherings and asked thoughtful questions about my transition to TechShield Corporation. His tone was different now, more respectful, but also more careful, like he was trying to rebuild a relationship he had damaged. I returned his calls when I felt like it and ignored them when I didn't. Not out of spite, but because I was busy with the acquisition transition, and because I didn't feel obligated to make his guilt easier to manage. He had spent 2 years treating me like my time and work weren't valuable. A few weeks of uncertainty about my availability seemed like appropriate consequences. The real test came at Easter dinner, 8 weeks after the acquisition announcement. Robert had asked if we would be comfortable hosting the family gathering at his house, given everything that had happened. Sarah and I agreed, partly because avoiding family gatherings wasn't sustainable and partly because I was curious to see how he would handle our first extended interaction since our conversation at the house. Robert was gracious without being overly deferential. He asked about my work at TechShield Corporation and listened to my answers like they actually mattered to him. When other family members brought up the acquisition, he expressed genuine pride instead of the careful neutrality I had expected. The most telling moment came when Robert's business partner stopped by to drop off some documents. Robert introduced me as my son-in-law, Jack, who just sold his cybersecurity company to TechShield Corporation. The introduction was proud, specific, and completely different from how he had talked about me 8 months earlier. After dinner, Robert and I found ourselves alone in his garage while Sarah helped her mother with cleanup. He handed me a beer and said, "I want you to know that I respect what you built, but more than that, I respect how you handled my skepticism. You could have made this whole situation much harder for Sarah and for our family." "I considered it," I said honestly. Robert smiled. "I probably deserved worse than I got." "You definitely deserved worse than you got." The real vindication came 8 months later when TechShield Corporation promoted me to Director of Small Business Security and announced that our platform had become their fastest-growing product line. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and equity package, but more importantly, it validated everything I had been trying to build since starting Guardian Shield Technologies. Robert read about the promotion in the Denver Business Journal and called immediately to congratulate me. His excitement seemed genuine, not forced, like he had genuinely become invested in my success rather than just trying to repair his own reputation. "I have been telling everyone about your promotion," he said. "The guys at the Contractors Association meeting, my neighbors, even my accountant. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." It was a nice sentiment, but I found myself thinking about how different this conversation would have been 2 years earlier. Back then, Robert wouldn't have understood why a promotion at a tech company mattered or why small business cybersecurity was worth caring about. His pride now felt genuine, but it also felt conditional on external validation that shouldn't have been necessary. "I appreciate that," I said. "Though I should mention that the work itself hasn't changed much. I'm still building security solutions for small businesses, just with more resources and a bigger team. But now you're doing it as a director at a major corporation," Robert said. "That has to feel different." "It feels good," I admitted, "but mostly because I get to keep working on problems I care about, not because of the title." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I think I understand that now. I used to think that job security and prestigious titles were the most important things. But watching what you built made me realize that finding meaningful work matters more than I thought." It was probably the closest Robert would ever come to admitting that his entire framework for evaluating professional success had been limited. He was learning slowly that there were different ways to build a valuable career. "Sarah told me you're thinking about starting another company eventually," he said. "Maybe in a few years," I said. "After I finish my commitment to TechShield Corporation. There are other problems in the small business space that I think technology could solve." "Well, you'll have my support this time," Robert said. "And my apologies again for not supporting you the first time." 3 years after the acquisition, Sarah and I bought a house in central Denver with a dedicated office where I could work when I wasn't at the TechShield Corporation headquarters. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable in ways our previous place had never been, with space for the life we were building together. Robert and I had developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. He stopped offering career advice and started asking genuine questions about the technology industry. I stopped expecting him to understand my professional choices and started appreciating his willingness to learn from his mistakes. The dynamic at family gatherings changed completely. Instead of deflecting questions about my computer work, I found myself explaining emerging trends in cybersecurity to relatives who were actually interested in the answers. Robert would introduce me to his friends as an expert in small business technology, and his pride felt earned rather than obligatory. Sarah was pregnant with our first child, and we had started talking about what kind of values we wanted to pass on. I thought often about the difference between skepticism and support, between asking hard questions and assuming failure. Robert had taught me accidentally how important it was to believe in people even when their path didn't make immediate sense. On a Saturday afternoon in April, I was working in my home office when Robert called to ask if I wanted to grab coffee and talk about a technology problem he was having with his project management software. It was the first time he had ever asked for my professional advice, and it felt like the completion of a long, complicated process of learning to see each other clearly. "I should have asked for your help years ago," he said when we met at the coffee shop near our house. "You weren't ready years ago," I said. "But you're ready now." We spent an hour discussing database optimization and user interface design, and Robert listened like my opinions actually mattered to him. Not because I had proven myself through external success, but because he had finally learned to value expertise over assumptions. Driving home, I thought about that Christmas dinner 2 years earlier, about standing in Robert's kitchen and hearing him explain why I was destined to fail. The memory didn't make me angry anymore, but it reminded me why earning respect felt more satisfying than demanding it. Some people needed time to recognize what they couldn't see immediately, and some victories were worth waiting for.